Hello and welcome to another episode of Attacking Third. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's episode, we're going to do a news and notes recap. There's been a lot happening across women's soccer, so we're going to chat all about it. A quick reminder before we take a deep dive into everything. Please download, follow, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to us on YouTube so that you never miss out whenever we go live. Hello to everyone joining us live. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Buenos dias. We are so excited to have you with us. We always appreciate whenever you link up with us on our lives. Lisa, how you doing, buddy? I got to check in with you. Not the best weekend for Philly.
It's not. Thanks for the salt in the wound, Sandra.
I'm just trying to check in. I just want to be like.
Yeah, it was a rough weekend. It was a very rough weekend. For those that don't know, I am an avid Philadelphia sports fan. And not only did we have one team in a championship, but we had two teams in a championship. Of course, both matches or both games happening on Saturday. The Philadelphia Union in the MLS Cup, that match happened on Saturday afternoon. The game was in LA. LA ends up beating the Union it was a double overtime. It went to penalty kicks. It was such a back and forth game. It was incredibly stressful. There was a red card. It was down a man. The penalty kicks is like very frustrating. The Union ends up losing in penalty kicks. They don't make a single shot. I'm like blown away by this. That was a really heartbreaking loss for myself and for the rest of Philadelphia. The Union deserved to win that. Jim Curtin, head coach of the Union, deserved to win that. It's very heartbreaking for me. But then later that night, we had Philadelphia Phillies in the World Series Game 6. They were going up against the Houston Astros, and Philly had won 2 games, but this was it. They needed to win Game 6. It was in Houston, and they just can't do it. Schwarber gets a home run, but it's not enough. We didn't win either of our championships, and now Philadelphia has become the only city to have 2 sports teams lose championships in the same day. So
That's not a bit of losers.
It's a really sad time. It's not great, but picking ourselves up by the bootstraps Monday morning and looking ahead to women's soccer because
I was
brighter times.
Like emotionally invested, alongside and with you. There were moments where I was like texting you, through it. I was bummed. I was like, oh man. I was like, I really got all of a sudden like emotional about it. And I was just like, oh geez. I saw the funny memes about it. People were like, the Eagles are undefeated, but like at what cost,
Right. Yes. Like I would have given like my pinky toes or my pinkies on my hands for like the MLS to get the MLS Cup for the Union. Yes, Lucy gives a shout out to the Eagles too. We do have the best NFL team. We're 8-0 right now with the Eagles, but another like horrifying stat: no team has ever gone undefeated and won the Super Bowl. So it's rough.
It's tough. It's tough out here in these Philly streets. I had to lead with it. I had to check in on you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I had to let the people know that you were doing okay, that you're going to be stronger for it. But I'm with you. Yeah, I was watching that MLS Cup final, and it just.
I think a lot of people were. I mean, it was a great game.
Late game drama. Who doesn't love late game drama? Unless you obviously have a horse in the race, right? But speaking of championship finals, let's dive into some fun news and updates for everybody. We want to throw it back to the NWSL Championship final because we're officially a week out from that, right? Shout out to everybody who joined us in Washington, D.C. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience for, I think, everyone involved if you were out there participating in all the events. But in terms of the actual championship final, it was announced that 915,000 people pointed remotes at TVs and took a look at the NWSL Championship final on CBS. It was a record. As of right now, it stands as the most watched match in league history, and that included a viewership increase of 71% from last year's final. And I know, like, when you and I saw that number, we were just like, it made us like kind of emotional. We were like, that's so cool, man. You love to see it.
Yeah, it is truly fantastic to see that so many different people tuned in. I think the craziest part of it is that 71% increase from last year's final to this year final. It was a Saturday night at 8 p.m. primetime kickoff on CBS. There was other sports happening, right? This is college football season when you get to the end of October, and it didn't matter. There were people there ready to tune in, watching two incredible teams in Portland and Kansas City fight for it. It being in Washington, D.C., I think that also helped feed into a little bit of the pomp and circumstance around it. I mean, this is huge. This is what the league deserves. This is what the players deserve. All these eyeballs. The fans also deserve it because they could watch the game. Anyone could watch the game on CBS. And it was on primetime. What better way to watch it versus like a 1 p.m. kickoff or even a 9 a.m. kickoff? Remember when that was a conversation? So, I mean, huge that this happened. And I think it's really a step in the right direction for the growth of the league. And I can't imagine and I cannot wait to see what happens next year, right? It's only going up.
No, I'm with you 100%. I think it's really important that you brought up those other points, that it was a pretty much like not just a heavy sports weekend, but really like a sports day. Like I believe one of the World Series games, I forget which game it was also, being played live. I think it was game 2, right? And it's just like you're in the beginning stages of a World Series, and like to, kind of go up and compete against other sort of headlining type of sports. I think folks were also keeping an eye on that to sort of have these numbers, come out from that. It just sort of felt like it added to all of the pomp and circumstance coming out of that weekend. That's really was one of the main takeaways, I think, for you and I, how much of an event it was, how much it really sort of felt like this sort of new, like a reset button was being pushed. It was a bit of like a turning of the page for the league. Like it just sort of felt like new standards. We were sort of witnessing the new standards kind of coming to life there. So I think that's an incredibly important point to bring up, because that was one of those things I think that people were going to keep an eye on in terms of everything else. Like, yes, it's a Saturday night game, championship final in the nation's capital, all of this, on CBS. And then I think there was also that other component that folks are going to wait, to kind of come down the pipeline and say like, okay, well, how did this do? Like, how did this stack up, right? Compared to other, sports that were happening across not just that weekend, but that Saturday. So congratulations to everybody involved. And if you were one of the 900,000 plus, making sure you were trying to watch on CBS, good on you. Keep it going. Keep that energy going. We'll give another congratulations to Portland Thorns for lifting the trophy on that night as well. They are officially 1 week into being champions of NWSL in 2022. A 2-0 win against Kansas City. But listen, Kansas City Current not walking away empty-handed when it comes to awards. Kansas City Current picking up a special award of their own, the NWSL Community Award. The recipients of the 2022 Nationwide Community Impact Award. It's a season-long community-focused initiative that promotes community partners and local service projects chosen and led by each NWSL club. And if memory serves me correct, this was an award that fans got to vote on.
Yes, I believe it was. So in addition to Kansas City winning it, it's also Global FC, that they're like the joint winners of this, promoting community partners, local service projects. So Global FC also receives $25,000 to support their organization's efforts. I think this is huge. It was the league-wide initiative, NWSL partnering with Nationwide to have this community partner, and Kansas City's was Global FC. Pretty cool. It's a project to assist refugees during resettlement. Global FC uses soccer to bridge socioeconomic disparities between the communities through formation of sports and culture. So I think it's really special that Kansas City won that. The fans, the community there in Kansas City, they show up, right? Like there was some other stat that Kansas City was like the most locally watched of the NWSL final of all the cities. And like, I think it's really huge that Kansas City won this, the NWSL Community Award. Like, fantastic for them.
Yeah, it was nice. Again, it was nice to see that kind of come out of NWSL Championship weekend. First of possibly many, right? Nationwide, one of the partners of NWSL, and I would imagine that hopefully this is something that they, continue in the seasons to come as they continue to be partners with the league, and opportunities for clubs to continue active community and active service to the markets that they're within. I think that's an important component and something that really makes NWSL unique in terms of a lot of the professional leagues across the world. It's great to sort of see players link up or sort of have a platform to showcase what they're passionate about and kind of come together and do all these cool things like this. But in terms of turning the page on NWSL Championship weekend, that means that there's one final international window for the United States women's national team. And we've chatted a little bit about, United States going up against Germany, and there's going to be some games coming up this week and this weekend, and we'll chat more about that with you all in a separate episode. But there was an announcement that was made for the United States women's national team. They're looking ahead to 2023 already, and we've got public information about the January camps. A little bit of a unique twist in this one. The United States women's national team is headed to New Zealand for January. They're going to be participating in their annual January camps, and there will be friendlies involved in this one. If people do not remember, in the previous January camp this year in 2022, it was just an extended training camp. There were no friendlies that were attached to that. They just participated in the She Believes Cup coming out of those January camps, but that's not going to be the case for this one as they ring in the new year for 2023 and look ahead to the World Cup. A couple of friendlies against World Cup co-host New Zealand.
Yeah, this is huge. I mean, when we look back to the World Cup draw and we saw that the United States group stage matches, all of them would be played in New Zealand. One of the first topics that we talked about, Sandra, was the fact that the United States has never played a match in New Zealand. Last November, they went to Australia and played a pair of friendlies. So this is not at all a surprising announcement out of US Soccer with the US women's national team, because they are now going to play the World Cup games in New Zealand. So of course they're going to get out there and play their first ever matches in New Zealand for the US women's national team. So they'll get to New Zealand. They'll actually train for a couple days. That's how the January camp goes. It's usually a bit longer. It's a little bit more extensive. It's a little bit more intense than regular training camps. So they'll train for 6 days, and then the U.S. will play against New Zealand on January 18th in Wellington at Sky Stadium. That match is going to be at 4 p.m. local time, but that's actually January 17th, 10 p.m. Eastern time in the United States. Then again, they'll play on January 21st at Eden Park. That game is also going to be 4 p.m. local, which means it's going to be January 20th in the U.S. at a 10 p.m. kickoff. And I think I'm mentioning the locations of these matches because that's incredibly, incredibly important, because the United States will then travel to New Zealand and play at those two stadiums again for the World Cup in just a few months. So the way that this lined up for the United States, the way that they were able to schedule this is like 2 claps for them, because this is fantastic. Not only are they playing in New Zealand while they'll be playing, but at the exact stadiums, at Sky Stadium, and then again at Eden Park, which is huge. Eden Park is a huge, huge stadium, 50,000 fans. Like, it's New Zealand's national stadium. It's hosted a lot there. So that's really fantastic to see that they'll be getting out there. But it's the first ever venue for the New Zealand women's national team at Eden Park. So, I mean, it's like a double entendre for the U.S. It's a great thing that they're going there, and then they're also playing in the stadiums and against the host nation.
No, I'm with you. I think it's a bit of a trial run, quite frankly. It's an opportunity for the team to sort of circle, they could circle it on their calendar. It's something for players to look forward to. Yes, they're going to close out their calendar year in 2022 against Germany and have, deservedly so, a bit of an off season to finally take some time off, but they've got something to look ahead to. That's not just a training camp. This is one that's going to have games attached around it and against the World Cup co-host. And we talked a lot about the World Cup draw that they were part of, and it's good to see that they're gonna really get a run out in facilities and in cities and markets, right, that they're going to, spend some time in for the World Cup. So I think it's going to be a good test for them. I know as the games get closer, we'll have training camp rosters for both teams to take a look at, and we'll take a look at some of the crossover between players who are going to play internationally and players who play for club and NWSL, and it'll be an interesting timeline to pay attention to. I think I know folks are always going to look at the numbers, and those are helpful, and you're going to look at a top ranked team like the United States and perhaps like the historical record against New Zealand, how United States typically has the number, right, has New Zealand's number pulled, and their majority of the time have led in the all-time series, I believe, against this team.
17-1-1.
And most recent is the Olympic game, that group game, where they kind of got stomped a little bit, but it was a little bit of a mix.
And the She Believes Cup, right? The She Believes Cup in 2022, that was in California, where it usually takes place. The U.S. beat New Zealand 5-0 in that match. But yeah, I mean, it definitely history to be played between these two sides. It's also because, not only the crazy time change, a 4 p.m. game to the day before a 10 p.m. game Eastern time, but it's also because of where New Zealand is located. When the United States goes there in January, it'll be summer for New Zealand. But when they play in the World Cup, it'll be winter and chillier temperatures. So it's like a little backwards in terms of that. But honestly, like that's the only thing I can think of that's like off a little bit.
And honestly, like good prep for us too, like good prep for like anybody that wants to, try to take in the 2023 World Cup live. You're going to have to start getting used to seeing, when the times actually match up and when the dates actually match up, right? Like you mentioned, like while it will be January the 18th, a 4 p.m. local kickoff, it'll be January 17th, 10 p.m. Eastern, if you're watching, from the United States. So practice for everybody involved. So I'd love to see it a little bit more on the U.S. soccer side of things here. A recent announcement for U.S. soccer and the task force that they are implementing in light of the Sally Yates investigation, independent investigation, with the full report, findings, and recommendations. The announcement of Mana Shim as chair of the task force to prevent the abuse and harassment that was discovered and further detailed in the Yates report. So good to see a big name like that. I think folks are at this point who have been following this is a name that they are familiar with. Mana Shim, one of, unfortunately, the many players who had to come forward with their truth about their experiences within women's professional soccer. But not just Mana Shim. Listed within this, a couple other names and notable names sort of joining along with this task force.
Yeah, so Mana Shim will be the chair of the task force, but also serving alongside her will be Shannon Box, former U.S. Women's National Team midfielder, and then Greg Smith, who is the Maryland State Youth Soccer Association Executive Director. So they're going to join Shim on the leadership of the task force. But then so that's the leadership. And then there's this entire group members that are joining Shim, Box, and Smith, including current former players from U.S. women's and national teams, U.S. extended national teams, representatives from the MLS, USL, youth, adult member organizations, players from the NWSL, president of the NWSL PA, directors of strategies. There's a lot of people listed on this task force. Some of the notable names I'm going to shout out: Erin Chastain, Tierna Davidson, U.S. player, Chicago defender; A.D. Franch, Kansas City goalkeeper; Naomi Girma, San Diego defender; Lauren Holiday, former player; Tori Huster, she's with Washington Spirit; Alex Morgan, Golden Boot winner; and then Yale Averbush West, who's also the GM of Gotham and a former national team player. So there's a lengthy list of names and people represented on this task force to develop the action plan in order to put the suggestions from the Yates reports and implement that with the board of directors for the US soccer members, including the youth clubs. They're going to gather best practices across the sports regarding safeguarding policies, identifying the biggest concerns, developing educational resources. I mean, there's a lot that this task force is going to tackle, and there's a lot of people that are involved in it. And I think like Naomi Girma, her name being on this list doesn't surprise me at all. But I love that she is one that has spoken up and said, hey, I want to be involved in this. I want to use my voice, use my leadership skills to put a stop to this horribleness.
Yeah, I think that having somebody like Mana Shim as the task force chair, and then somebody like Shannon Box as part of the vice chairs, but also somebody like Greg Smith as part of the vice chair. I like that within some of the task force members as well, that there are people across the board who have experience with youth soccer in this country specifically, because very, very sadly, one of the things that came out of the Yates report was, the fact that this is how, that it's all systemic, and that this actual report was very specific and focused on women's professional soccer, but that how everything had, connections to each other, and that Yates ultimately, alluding to the fact that this goes much deeper. It goes through to youth soccer. So it can't just, it's important that this is a task force that's for safety in general, not just for women in professional soccer, but that there are people on this, with ties to youth soccer, because, the youth absolutely have to be protected as well. So important to have things like this implemented. And I would imagine that we're going to continue to see, varying levels of different types of solutions, hopefully, to try to target these areas. So congratulations, absolutely, are in order to Mana Shim and everyone involved in this as well. And we'll keep everyone updated, right, as things sort of continue to develop, kind of post publishing of the Yates reports. We do have some more off-season news to get into in regards to the NWSL. We're going to chat a little bit perhaps about expansion. What does that mean? What could it look like? I don't know. We're going to chat all about it. Free agency is officially in full swing, and we've got to get through all of that with you all, and we'll do it right after a quick break.
What are they? No way! You're a transformer!
Bumblebee, train our youngest members.
Bumblebee's coming to live with us!
Ready to help however we can.
I want to talk about house rules.
Sensing a fun killer.
Transformers Earthspark. Stream the new series with your family exclusively on Paramount Plus.
All right, let's get back to NWSL off-season action. You know what? Let's start with expansion groups. Let's start there. There's a couple different areas and directions in which we could take this segment of the show, but I think we got to chat a little bit about expansion, because I think that's something that gets folks excited. I think it also sends a signal, I think, to folks, the audiences who say, what's going on with NWSL? They're talking about all this success and the growth of the league, and sometimes folks out there equate growth with expansion. And that's a different debate for a different day. I'm on the other side of that debate, but expansion is always exciting, because especially coming out of a NWSL Championship final, there was a lot of chatter about it. We heard pretty often throughout that week from NWSL Commissioner Jessica Berman, and she joined us at one point for an episode of Attacking Third out there, and got a lot of questions about expansion. And this has sort of been kind of, in the news cycle for some time, even before the championship final. What could it look like? How soon could it arrive for NWSL? But the deadline is now passed at this point, now at the time of us doing this episode. But last week during the championship final, as Berman was addressing questions about it, had said at that moment in time that the deadline was approaching, and that the target is 2024, and 2 possible expansion sides for that year. But as of now, over 100 applications and submissions for that deadline. I think it says a lot about different markets and the league itself, and people wanting to, those groups wanting to be a part of NWSL.
I mean, even looking at the growth from 2021 to 2022, adding into expansion sides in San Diego Wave FC and Angel City FC and LA. Yes, two California teams, but you look at they broke records in their attendance that they had. LA playing at the Bank of California, San Diego initially playing at Terreo, and then moving to Snapdragon and getting those tickets sold for Snapdragon. I think ticket revenue increased 125% from last year, according to the league. And yes, that is large in part due to those two California sides. But if you build it, they will come, right? And that's exactly what we learned from these NWSL teams growing into this year. So the commissioner of the NWSL, Jessica Berman, did say that she was expecting to receive 5 to 10, quote, meaningful bids for an NWSL expansion side. Because, yes, there are a lot of cities and there are a lot of teams that want to advance their status as a club or get an NWSL club to their city. But there's so much more that goes into it. It's not just like, hey, I'm Lisa in Philadelphia and I would like an NWSL team here. Like, you need investors, you need a foundation, you need a partnership perhaps with the MLS team that's in your city. There's a lot that actually has to go into it. So yes, over 100 bids or something brought into this, but about 5 to 10 meaningful bids that are actually like, okay, in a year's time, we could have a team there with a stadium, with practice facilities, and you could get fans to the games, because there's so many different metrics and factors that honestly come into all of this. But I mean, I'm still making a bid for NWSL in Philadelphia. I don't think we're going to get it quite yet, but there's been a lot of different teams and cities that are coming in. I know NWSL to the Bay Area, that's led by people like Allie Wagner, Danielle Slayton, former national team players that are in the Bay Area. And yes, that would be a third California team, but I don't hate it, because clearly there's an appetite for women's soccer in California and in Northern California, of course. I think Utah is also another area that's expected to receive a bid. But for 2024, there has been a team there. They got moved to Kansas City. I mean, there are a lot of different places. You look at Minnesota as well, the Aurora, looking for a bid to get an NWSL team. What do you think, Sandra?
I think there's going to be a whole, that there were, my initial reaction to it when Berman was talking about it during championship weekend was, that yes, there were going to be a whole ton of applicants. And I was in agreement, in which Berman said that it's actually going to serve as a bit of a weaning out process. Because while I'm with you, well, it's very lucrative, I think, for some clubs or some of their brands to include a women's professional soccer team in their mix, right? I think the commissioner and board of governors and the other teams, the other 12 clubs that are currently in existence in the NWSL, want to ensure that they have, the right partners, right, within the mix. So like you said, we've heard a lot about the Bay Area. We've had some of the owners on the show to talk about expansion to the Bay Area specifically. I think we did an episode with Brandy Chastain and Allie Wagner to chat a little bit about that. But I mean, it's a movement that's in the process of being led by former players, right? And you mentioned, Danielle Slayton and Allie Wagner. So it just it seems, I think folks might be like, wow, a third California team, but I'm with you. It's a huge, first of all, it's a huge state. One, in the literal sense, it's just a very large state, but two, it's no secret that California has had a long ties to really outstanding soccer programs, right? When it comes to women's soccer. And obviously there's a lot of eyes on Utah as the Real Salt Lake, Soccer Holdings was sold, and there was a new ownership group that came into the Salt Lake area, and that included the possibility of adding the Utah Royals into the mix of teams and brands that they have out there in Utah. That there was a possibility to sort of revive them, bring them back from the long nap that they've been taking. And I think for folks who are maybe looking at some of the news that have dropped out there, that these are the two teams that perhaps have the targets, that maybe these are the likely two teams. But again, that's a lot of applicants. You're talking about over 100. That's probably a ton of different markets, a ton of different cities. And I think in terms of, potential ease into the league, I think that's part of why the Royals perhaps seem to look to have that kind of, not green light. I will just say like yellow green light at the moment, like to have
It's
this
not
path.
red. It's not red.
So they're definitely not on red. So to sort of have this path back into the league. But I think it's interesting to know that Berman was also asked questions specifically about Utah and the Royals. I think at the time when everything was kind of buttoned up and tied up with a bow, that the potential for a Utah Royals expansion team to return back in had a certain price point around it. And a lot has changed in this league. Valuations for certain teams have skyrocketed. And I believe the original valuation around it was like somewhere between 2 to 3 million. Yeah. And that is out. It's foolishness at this point. That's not something I think that the league might have to have conversations about that. I think it's also all going to depend on everything within the applications and the process of expansion, and all the legalese that I'm sure they're going to have to go through. Is it possible to raise that number up? Is it too ironclad of a contract to say no, this is where it stands, and yes, 2 million is going to be the fee that's going to be the total amount for you to make your return. There's also other things around a team returning to Utah that players have been vocal about in terms of things like the current political climate and women's rights and women's health care, that players in this league have been vocal about. And so when they're looking at markets and when they're looking at cities, Berman and others have said that is something else that they will take into consideration, that there will always be player first mentality even when it comes to expansion. So is that a city? Is that a market? Is that a state in which it will benefit players to play there and within it, right? So these are all very, very different things to take into consideration, right? When they're going to look at all of these expansion bids. There's other people. I think there's other people that are like, who wants a third California team? But
I mean, it's needless to say, it is not black and white by any means. It's not black and white, and you have to. I think having a Utah team where there's already been one, it does shed a positive light on okay, it's happened before, we could do it again, but also, hey, it happened before and it didn't work out. So now where do we go from here? I think you also have to take a look at the MLS sides that have said, hey, we want to expand and grow, because currently there are a number of teams in the league, the NWSL, that have partnerships with MLS sides. You look at Orlando, Houston, Portland, Washington. They have all of these other facilities and things that they can share and partner with and utilize that, whether it's with double headers or with front office staff and ownership, things like that. There's just so much of it that comes into it. I know other MLS teams that put in bids are Atlanta, Austin, Toronto, looking
Texas.
for NWSL.
Another big state, right? What are the states that can have multiple teams and it sort of feel like it's still spread apart? California and Texas, right, are two of those. It's going to be interesting to see if it's if it'll be a combination of an MLS affiliated team, or perhaps, and then the second team, being a non-MLS team, I also think it's important to know that, prior to the NWSL Championship and Berman's State of the League during that time, that there was a previous, media availability, from Berman. And I think initial phrasing that was used for expansion was intention, that there's intention for two teams. So, I mean, expansion we know can look very, very different in this league. Expansion can look like 2 brand new markets jumping into the fold, and expansion can also unfortunately look like the adoption and the absorption of a former club, and ensuring that there's another market for a franchise to go to. So it's something I think that we're going to continue to keep our eye on, and in the build up to 2024. It just sort of feels like this is really just kind of like the first step in terms of getting all of those applicants and getting all those submissions, and then kind of having to wean out the process. And I would imagine that bids that were placed and are going to be declined will probably be told first before the markets and bids who will join, given the news that they're going to link up. So it'll probably be a lengthy process.
Like, we won't find out anytime soon. And this isn't until a 2024 expansion. So we have a little bit of time.
Yeah, no, it's just something to keep an eye on, right? There's going to be a long build up in the process to this, and it should be met with excitement, because like I said, growth looks different from everywhere. I mean, I was very impressed to hear that a franchise like Minnesota Aurora, wanted to place a bid. I kind of think that they're not dark horses; they're probably like long shots. I would imagine that there's probably several bids in front of them that probably have a more complete package in terms of a bid to have an NWSL side. I think there's again, there's just so many things that come into consideration when considering an expansion team in a market. And I think a big one of those things is like infrastructure, right? Like now with the CBA in full swing as well for players and between the league, that's going to be one of those things. I mean, there's literal clauses in the CBA where it talks about, playing facilities and, on turf versus on grass. Are the bids that are being placed by these potential markets and cities, do they have the actual infrastructure in place to be a fully professionalized team?
And Minnesota Aurora already has a team, right? They're already competing in the Women's Super League or not the Women's Super League, but in the lower level league in the United States for women's professional soccer. So that's also another kind of ripple effect that comes into it, because there are already those players that are competing on that team. What kind of happens there? I mean, I like that they threw their hat in the ring. I think it's a solid debate. But at this point in time, I just don't see Minnesota Aurora making the jump into the NWSL by 2024.
We'll see. They might be one of those teams that are told, hey, this looks great, but maybe next time, maybe for the next round, we'll have to pay attention to it. And again, all this stuff is exciting to chat about. I'm sure the next time there's another State of the League by Berman, there will be some sort of update, and it's something that we'll get to chat about. But it's not just expansion, right, that folks sort of get fixated on in an off season. I mean, there's something else to get really, really excited about during this NWSL off season. It is the first official off season in which there is a free agency period in the league. Speaking a little bit about the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, already in reference to the expansion group. This is in reference to free agency, players who have had 6 or more years of service within the league, officially free agents. There was a discrepancy at one point. They had to go to arbitration to actually get the official list. But since then, there has been some news. So this is interesting for you and I, Lisa, to sort of talk about and bring on the show right here, because what we have so far is really just a lot of players re-signing with their former and now still current clubs. We just had a really great interview with Bryn Wilkinson, the head coach of Portland Thorns, and we chatted a little bit about how somebody like Christine Sinclair announced with enthusiasm her return to Portland and was targeted as one of those potential big name free agents, right? But said, hey, I'm going to come back for another year with Portland, try to win another one of these trophies. And it'll be her 11th season with the Thorns, a player who has been with that franchise since their inaugural season in 2013. But that's really been the trend so far. We've seen players negotiating with their current clubs, and it remains still their current club. We saw Sophie Schmidt, another one of these players, a Canadian compatriot of Christine Sinclair, ink a 2-year deal with Houston Dash. So again, player like Schmidt big name target perhaps on free agency, but staying in Houston.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of players that have re-upped their contracts with their current clubs. With Gotham, it's Ifeoma Onumonu, Taylor Smith, Mandy Freeman. You touched on Christine Sinclair, and this isn't surprising at all because those players that have been with their clubs consistently, you talked about Christine Sinclair. She's been with the Thorns since 2013. Why would she go anywhere else? That's her home. So I imagine the first wave of news we'll hear from these free agents is that they're re-signing with their individual clubs. Now, of course, there's a lot of negotiations and contract discussions that come with that because these players now have the option and the freedom to negotiate their own salaries with what they want. But the free agency list is incredibly long, and I am really excited to see some of the big names maybe take moves, see where they can get a little bit more money or play with a different style of soccer that they're looking to play, or just get out of a market to shake things up and advance themselves as players, because the list of free agency players is really, really big. I mean, there's players like Debinha, midfielder with North Carolina Courage, Brazilian international. I would be shocked if NC Courage doesn't look to keep Debinha at that club. I mean, she is their midfield. She went on a tear at the end of the year, but hey, if the offer is not right for Debinha, like I could see that move happening. Look at some players like Julie Ertz, Tobin Heath, like what are they going to do in this free agency? Julie Ertz was with Chicago, traded to Angel City, but she's been on maternity leave, had a baby. I could see her never even stepping foot in LA to play with Angel City, depending on what happens there. There's a lot of Chicago Red Stars players, Sandra, that are on this list as free agents. You look at Vanessa DiBernardo, Danielle Colaprico, Morgan Gautral. These are players that have been with Chicago for a pretty long time. Yuki Nagasato, she was in Racing Louisville, then she's back in Chicago. I mean, there's just a lot that can happen with this free agency list. But as of right now, no crazy moves have happened. It's all been players re-upping their contracts at their respective clubs where they are right now.
I think we'll see the break, eventually. I think folks are waiting for those big signings or the big move, right? The player that might make the leap to a new club or otherwise, and it'll probably happen in the next 10 days or so. I believe it's a negotiating period right now, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing players who obviously want to re-up with their current clubs go through those negotiations, and sign those contracts. But the announcement for if you're going to sign with a new club is not going to happen until November 15th. So I would imagine that any of the negotiating that's going on right now between players and potentially new clubs, we're not going to get that information until that deadline. So that's already been written in ink, right? So the deadline has already been there. So it's like we're going to just sort of have to do this sort of wait and see approach, right? We're doing the news and notes episode, and we're talking about the information that's in front of us. But I'm with you. I think as of right now, in terms of just sort of hearing all of the names remaining on that list, Debinha is target number one. I mean, this is a player that has had ties to global clubs. This is a player I think people anticipated at one point perhaps was going to go overseas, and play in a different organization in Europe specifically. So I'm with you. I think Debinha is probably the prime target there. I would anticipate that North Carolina is trying to do everything they could possibly do to ensure that they keep this player with them in North Carolina, but it's all going to depend. That's the beauty of free agency, right?
Yeah.
Everything sort of has to line up: the right opportunity, the length of time, the dollar amount, et cetera. And it's exciting for us because we've never really had a free agency period to sort of cover like this. So I'm excited to sort of see how it comes down. I'm really just keeping an eye on November 15th. I would imagine that everything, that's been being discussed right now behind the scenes up to this point will eventually, get its announcement either late, November 14th or very early November 15th. So everybody keep an eye out. We will as well. But, it's not just players who are making movement throughout the league. We've got some coaching updates to talk about as well. Going to shout out Theo Lloyd-Hughes with the breaking out of championship weekend about Houston Dash and New Jersey, New York, Gotham FC. it was rumored and reported that Juan Carlos Amoros was going to make a move, and then it was announced officially that he is now no longer the head coach of Houston Dash, but the head coach of Gotham FC. And maybe incorrect phrasing, right? He was interim head coach with Houston Dash, and perhaps maybe the assumption in an off season is that there's going to be negotiations directly with the club that you're currently with, even as interim, and sort of see what comes out of that. But Gotham striking first, striking early.
Yeah. I mean, when I first saw that Juan Carlos Amoros was leaving Houston, right, that's how the news cycle kind of happened. It was reported that he wasn't coming back to Houston as the head coach, as the interim manager, which is how he finished the year, leading Houston to a 4th place finish on the table, their first ever NWSL playoff appearance. And he had been in Houston for a bit of time as a coach, and that's kind of how he slotted into that interim head coach role. And I was really impressed with what he did with Houston and the Dash and leading them to the playoffs. But this move of him going to Gotham, I suspect that it was a pretty good deal for him not to turn down, because this Gotham side is one that went on a 12-game losing streak at the end of the year under Scott Parkinson, who left in the middle of the season. Towards the end of the season, Hugh Menzies, former Jamaican international coach, stepped in, but it was always pretty clear from Gotham that Menzies wasn't going to be the full-time head coach moving forward. It was more of just a solution to finish out the season this year in 2022. So now that they're having Juan Carlos Amoros as the new head coach, a 3-year contract at Gotham, this is a Gotham side that wants to turn things around. They don't want to go on breaking losing streak records next year. They have good players, but how do they turn that around? And they really have to do that. Just 13 points to end this year. 1 win, 17 losses, and 4 draws for Gotham this year. If anyone can do it, I think it's Juan Carlos Amoros. I like this for him, but that means now that Houston is looking for a head coach, Orlando still looking for a head coach, Washington Spirit still looking for a head coach. I mean, these conversations are never ending about who's going to step in and lead these teams next year.
Yeah, no, we'll see what happens in Houston. Perhaps it was a little bit of a blurry or grayed area in terms of the Dash franchise and the possibility of having negotiations for a head coach when there currently is no news or update on James Clarkson, who has been placed on administrative leave since just ahead of the regular season in 2022. And we'll see what comes out of that. I believe, if memory serves me correct, people can stat check me on this. The initial coaching contract for Clarkson, I think, expires in December. So perhaps maybe there's a little bit of a waiting game right now if you're the Houston Dash in terms of trying to target a potential new head coach, right? But I would hope that perhaps a franchise like the Pride are maybe having conversations with Seb Hines. I thought they did some good things, and we'll see. And we've also seen, while there's not a head coach named yet in Washington for the Spirit, they did make a pretty big hire in Dawn Scott, who was recently named their Director of Performance, Medical, and Innovation. Big name if you follow the United States Women's National Team for the last 2 cycles. Dawn Scott responsible for all of the training and performance and medical evaluations for the USWNT during their World Cup cycles. So big hire there.
Huge. I mean, she was with the US Women's National Team, English Women's National Team, FIFA, UEFA, MLS. She was at Inter Miami, CF of MLS, overseeing first team, MLS Next Pro. Like, she has a plethora of experience at this level. And I think this is such a big hire for Washington Spirit, because it's the first ever, right, for Washington Spirit Director of Performance, Medical, and Innovation, which is steps in the right direction for this Washington Spirit club to kind of hire someone like Dawn Scott into this position. But hey, now they need a head coach, right? It's great to have this type of director of performance in the first ever role. And who better else to hire besides Dawn Scott, kind of see how it turns this team around. But
it sets a bar a little bit.
It does.
Like you have the spirit of the franchise making this hire in Dawn Scott. I'm sure folks are going to say, well, if this is where you're going with this position, who's going to fill the role of head coach? We will see. Additional news on the coaching side for Gotham FC. Shout out to Jackie Gutierrez from Women Kick Balls, just saying that Bev Yanez is also on the move as well. We could potentially see the assistant coach coming out of Gotham and with a new side in 2023. Again, something else that we'll have to keep an eye on. Off season continues. Soccer never sleeps, and neither do we. You can always catch us live. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning and listening to Attacking Third. Download, follow, listen to us anywhere you get your shows. You can watch us too. Make sure you hit subscribe on YouTube to get alerts whenever we go live, youtube.com/attacking3rd. And Lisa and I will be back with so much more because the United States Women's National Team plays Germany this week. So stay tuned. For Sandra Herrera and Lisa Roman, this was Attacking Third.